In this tutorial, we will be covering how to create spell files in Arcane in quite a level of detail. If this is your first tutorial, or you're not sure exactly what spells can be used for and how to use them, I highly recommend watching our overview tutorial first, and there'll be a link at the top of your screen now that will take you there. Before we start, it's important to make sure that you're not using any audio hardware that may introduce latency. Bluetooth, for example, can introduce up to a few hundreds of milliseconds of latency sometimes, and that will mean that the spells that you're creating might be somewhat out of sync with the audio and you might not realize it until it comes to an actual live show. So if possible, I suggest that you use headphones or speakers that are plugged directly into your computer. Now, without further ado, let's jump in. So first things first, we'll want to load some audio into Arcane. So we'll click on load track here. I'm actually going to go and open the sidebar here. So go into load track. And what we'll want to do to begin with is load the master audio file for the track that we're going to be creating a spell for. Now, the reason that we use a master audio file is that typically this will contain some ID3 information about the track, including the track name and the artist, which will then get embedded in the spell and used by Arcane to match the correct spell to tracks when it comes to a live performance. So if we go here and click on Open Master Audio File, we're going to be creating a spell for Down to the Wire by Hybrid. You can see that the title and artist is already filled out here. Now, if you don't have a master audio file with this metadata, for example, if you just got a raw WAV file, that's fine. You can load that in and then just type the title and artist manually. Once you're done, we can click load, and then we're ready to work on this file. Later on in the video, we'll load stems because that will unlock a bunch of additional features for us when it comes to creating spells, but I'll show that to you when it becomes necessary to sort of move on to the next step. So let's go to the spell editor here, and we can see here that there's no spell that's already been found that matches this particular track. So we can go ahead and either click create new spell here or at the top of the screen, and we're given a fresh empty spell for us to work on. So the first thing that we want to create inside the spell is the beat grid, and there are buttons on the left here that will allow us to do that. So if you hover over here, you can see this button allows us to mark the start of a bar. We can also use the shortcut key S that you can see in brackets there, and this button will allow us to mark the end of the bar. So what we'll do is we'll play the track, wait for a good bar that sounds defined enough. We'll hit S and then we'll hit E at the end of that same bar. So if I hit play here, so I'll wait for a good point. So there's no beats yet, so I'll wait for the first beat to come in. Okay. I'm just going to wait a bit longer just in case. Okay, that's a bit better. S, E, and I'll pause it there. So from this point onwards, there are two things you can do. You can either, if you know what the BPM is, you can go and manually enter it, or if you're not sure, you can go to the end of the track, like click here, for example, listen for another downbeat, press E again, and then Arcane. I'll show you here actually. Hit play. So you can see there that Arcane has then been able to approximate a beat grid between the first downbeat that I set and the last one. And it's got a BPM of 87.01, which I know is actually correct for this song. But you don't have to do it that way. So if we click undo up here, we go back to this. What we can do instead, just with those first two markers that we set, we can extend this beat grid to the end of the track and the beginning, and then just go and set 87 here. So you'll be able to adjust all these properties at the bottom however you like. If you have multiple beat grids, for example, for a variable beat song, you'll also be able to handle all of that. So now to check if our beat grid is actually aligned correctly, we can start the metronome. So if you go into the metronome options here And by default, the metronome will be muted, so you can just toggle the mute here. Now, if we go to near the start of the track, we'll be able to hit play and then see here if the metronome is in sync and then adjust accordingly. So I'm going to go hit play now. Sounds pretty accurate actually. Move further on. Okay, that sounds good. But if you need to, you can adjust the position, shifting it left and right. You can see if you hover over here, you can use the left arrow or the right arrow keys, or you can enter in some numbers manually. Now, a quick thing that I used just then that you may or may not have seen is edit history. So Arcane will keep track of all the changes that you make in your spell and allow you to undo and redo them as you find with most software. So if you hover over undo here, you can see that you can use the usual shortcut. In Mac, it'll be Command Z. In Windows, it'll be Control Z. And then redo will also allow you to do that. So I can click these buttons to undo or redo. I can also use shortcuts on my keyboard to undo and redo like that. And this applies to every change that you make to a spell. Now let's move on to creating our first layer. We'll begin with creating a cue layer to mark some key points in the track. These will be able to be used for things such as triggering macros in Grand MA or clicking on buttons in Resolume, but they're not the most descriptive layers. They don't have information about the envelope, etc. So they're not going to be able to be used to control fader values, but they're still very useful and have a lot of applications. So to start, what we'll do is we'll go down here, click on add a cue layer, and you can see this layer here has appeared. We can also open the waveform below that will allow us to see where we are in the track. So I'm going to go pick something around here and start placing down a couple of cues. So what I'll do is I'll play the track and then add the cue points there. So I'll hit play here. Maybe wait for a bridge. So I'm going to call that bridge. What you can also do here is you can lock the scroll and zoom in so that it follows the track. So I actually missed a transition there, so I'm going to go back. Put the cue down. And you can lock and unlock the position to the cursor here. Okay, that's not really a change, so I'm going to undo that. Okay, and I think that is a build up here. I'm probably going to be hitting a drop soon. Okay, there we go, and I'll pause it there. Let's rename this cue point drop. And let's give it a color of red just to make things interesting. And zoom back out to see what we've got. So this was also a bridge. I'm going to name that one bridge. So an important thing to note here is that throughout all of that, I had this snap to grid feature on. And this will use the beat grid to be able to align different things that you're doing and creating with it. So by default, it's on 1/16th beat, but you can set this to any beat you want or disable it. And let me show you what happens there. So I'll zoom in so we can see high resolution. So we can actually see that I didn't lay this drop exactly in the right place. It was perhaps 1/16 of a beat too late. So what I can do is I can change this to a full beat. And then as I drag it around, you can see that everything aligns to a full beat here. What I can also do, if I zoom out, select all of these cues, and because I got this on full beat, I can click Align Selection to Grid, and now it makes sure that all of these cues are aligned to the nearest full beat. You can change this to anything, so I'll change this to a quarter, and you can see that it allows me to align to every quarter beat here. And I can also completely disable it, allowing me to place this anywhere. So I'll undo that, go back to 1/16, which is probably going to be the most useful, and then let's zoom back out again. So now let's move on to creating our first percussion layer. So I'm going to go and click Add a Layer here. You can also go into these layer options here to change layer settings. I'm going to focus on the bass drum to begin with, so I'm going to call this bass drum update. And you can see the name of the layer has updated there. You'll also be able to change the layer kind from the same window. So I'm going to go ahead and open the waveform here and close the waveform under the cue layer. Now I want to make use of some of Arcane's built-in beat detection and event detection to begin with. And usually what you would do for that is you would drag and select a part of the waveform, which will open a panel at the bottom of the screen here. Now you can see that there's part of the functionality is actually disabled. It says to automatically detect and insert events into a spell, please load stems instead of a master track. So now is a good point for us to go back to the load track page and actually load the stems. So you can go to load track. Now in the best case scenario, if you have access to the original audio and a DAW, you can export each of the different layers of the song as individual audio files, but that's not always the case. And in those instances, you can just use an online or local stem separator to take a master audio file and create individual audio files. That's what I've done in this case. I've used some open source software called DMX to separate the audio file into 4 different stems. And I've typically found that that gives pretty good results when it comes to creating spells. So I'm going to go ahead and load those stems now. So I click on Open Stems, select the 4 files here, click on Open, and then click on Load. Now if I go back to the spell editor, I can open the waveform here. And the first thing you'll notice that's different is the shape is a little different because this naturally only includes the drums from this song. There's also a few more options open up here on the left. So we can solo this particular layer, or we can mute it. And if I hit play, I'll go to later on in the track, hit play. You can see it's muted, so there's no drums. I can also solo it. And all of these options are also available from the music player options here. So I can click on that, go in and solo and mute whichever layers I want, and also change the volume, playback speed, and also control the metronome from here as well. So I'll pause that for now. So I want to focus on getting the bass drum looking good for just after the drop. So what I'm going to do is hover over the timeline here and click and drag for 4 bars. And what that will do is put a loop in place so that if I jump to the end here and I hit play, you can see it loops back to the beginning of the loop. So now if I drag and select the waveform for here, and the panel opens, you'll see that there's a lot more options that have been made available for us at the bottom here. And this is what allows us to use some audio analysis to automatically create events for our spell. So we have a bunch of different presets at the bottom of the screen here, and you can see as I click them, they will change all of the different values in this panel. At the top, we have a high pass and low pass filter, and you can see as I move this, the waveform in the bottom right is adjusted. And if you want to hear what's actually being isolated, you can click on Apply to Track, which will add this filter to the waveform. So if you hit play now, you can see it, you can hear it's a lot more muted. I can adjust this a bit, apply to track again, and the filter is applied during playback. I could also click on the filter button here, or stem playback options, and adjust the filter here, which will adjust it for the playback, like so. I can also go into the music player options here, and you can see that the filter is active for the drums. I can go in here, adjust the filter like this, or clear the filter. So I'll pause for now. And going back to this waveform, what we want to do is focus on the bass drum. So I'm going to click on Apply the Bass Drum preset. Now on this waveform on the right, anything that's been detected that can be added to the track is going to be highlighted in white. And we can see here that there's only one thing so far. So we're probably going to need to adjust some of these values so that we're able to add more things to the track. So to increase the sensitivity, what I'm going to do is decrease the start threshold. Let's go down until it looks like it might be about right. So that's added a few events there. So let's click now on Add to Spell. So now what we can do is jump to the start of the loop and hit play. And we can see as we're playing through this that there's a few bass drums that have been missed. So we probably need to adjust these values. So I'm going to hit pause, undo adding those to the spell, go back to the start threshold, and bring this down to about there. Okay. So now I'll hit Add to Spell and hit play again. Okay, so those look like they might be somewhat lagging behind. So to address that, what I'm going to do is select all of these and then adjust the start time here until it looks like they're about right. So I'll hit play. I'm going to drop it by about 27, so I'll put that down to 20 there. Okay, that looks to be about right. The next thing I want to do is make sure that all of these bass drum elements have a consistent amount of decay and amplitude so that they will flash fade as the same amount. So what I'm going to do is set the amplitude for all of them to be 1 and give it a decay of 150. Now if we hit play, we can see the visualize on the right is more consistently going to the end and decaying at the same rate. So that's looking good. So the next thing I notice is that at the start of every bar, there is a symbol. So I am going to go and add that one manually. So firstly, let's add a new layer here. Let's give it a name of symbol, update. And then I'm going to sort of zoom in a little bit to this area, set my snap to grid to 1/4, switch to add events mode, and then click and drag like that. I'm going to zoom out again, and now what I want to do is repeat this for every bar here. So I'm going to go back to select mode, select that event, click on repeat selection, repeat every 1 bar, and I want to repeat 3 times. So I then hit apply, and now I've got 4 symbols there. So now if I hit play, and that looks good. So now if I pause that, like with the bass drum, I'll be able to select all of these and adjust their duration amplitude as required, but I think that looks good. The next thing that I want to focus on is that rapid toms that happen towards the end of each bar. So what I'm going to do is drag and select on the timeline here to tighten the loop and zoom in again, create a new layer. Let's call these toms. Scroll that way a bit. And let's just open the waveform just next to there to make it a bit easier and hit play to sort of see roughly where they are on the track. Okay, they're very rapid. So what I'm going to do is adjust the playback speed so that we're able to really precisely target where they are. So I'm going to hit play here and then drop this right down. We can do half speed. Okay, so it's in this sort of area here. So what I'm going to do is go back to add mode. Say actually, I've got snap to grid on 1/4 still, so I'm going to adjust that back down to 1/16. Let's say, okay, so it starts about here, so there. Let's start off with that and see how that looks. Okay, that last one, let's set them, let's actually go back to select mode. Let's give them all a duration of 50. Okay, that last one's definitely too late, so let's drag that one. And I think this one's a little bit more rapid. That one's too late. Okay, that sounds pretty good. We can reset the playback speed now and play that and see what that sounds like. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. So what I'll do now is zoom out of here, select these, repeat them every bar for 3 bars, hit apply, and then put a loop in place for the whole 4 bars again and see what that looks like. Okay, that looks pretty good. So what I want now is to repeat all of this section every 4 bars for the next 3 sections. So what I'm going to do is I see I have an event here that's slightly out, so I'm going to delete that one because we have the beat already at the start of this bar, so we don't need it there. I'm going to select these events here, zoom out, repeat section. I want to repeat now every 4 bars, and I want to repeat 3 more times. Then I can hit apply. Exit the loop by just clicking outside of it here on the timeline, and then play. And I'm also going to unmute the other stems. Okay, I'm going to pause there. So this seems to be looking pretty good, but to really get an idea for how this is going to look when it comes to a real visual performance, either with lights or VJ software, what I can do is use the built-in visualizer in Arcane to assign different parts of the visualizer to these different layers and see what that looks like. So I'm going to open the visualizer in a new window by clicking this here, move that to the side of the screen, move this to the side of the screen, and close the sidebar for now. Then I'm going to go to the output map here, expand the percussion layer. I'm going to assign the chroma here to the bass drum. I will assign the cymbals to the zoom, and I will assign the highlight to the toms there. So now I can hit play and see what that looks like. So I think that looks pretty good. And of course, if you have connected Arcane to any other software using OSC or DMX, you'll be able to control that software instead of using the visualizer to test your spell. And you'll be able to connect whatever you've configured to whichever layers you so choose from this page. I think we'll stop there for today. In a later video, I'll go through in a little bit more depth how you can adjust envelopes and shapes of events in a bit more detail to do really interesting things with faders. And look out for other videos that will also show you how you can connect Arcane to Resolume, to Grand MA, to whatever software or hardware that you use and want Arcane to be able to control. And there'll also be videos that shows you how you can use this software to expedite and speed up the process of creating a full time code in software like Grand MA. At the time of recording this video, Arcane is still in private beta. So if you're interested in trying this out, please go to arcanewizards.com and sign up to our waitlist. And please also feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.